Hey, everybody, welcome to Capacity Conversations, episode 7. We've got Joe Schulz here, who is from Schulz Logistics. He's the owner of the company. I always love talking to freight brokerage leaders and owners because they've really got this complete view of the entire business and they can look at the whole thing very holistically. So I'm really excited to ask Joe a little bit about freight tech, freight in general, and when we were planning for the conversation, we talked a little bit about if you have all of these tools available to you and everybody has those same tools available to them, at a certain point, it gets a little bit, maybe even commoditize what you're actually doing. Because if you're automating the same process as everybody else, how do you get ahead? So that'll be a key theme for our conversation today. And I will bring Joe in here, and I'm really excited to talk to him. Joe, how's it going?
Great. How are you today?
I'm doing all right, man. I'm doing all right. We were talking a little bit in the pre-show that my 3-year-old is going to try to bust down my door, so I stick a 35-pound dumbbell in front of the door to make sure that he can't pry it open. So good times. We'll see. He's getting stronger all the time. And it's pretty cold where you are. You're in Nebraska, right?
Yeah, we are not having the best weather ever. It was minus 18 when I left home this morning. We're going to get up to a balmy 11 today, so moving in the right direction.
You know what? I'm just going to go ahead and say it. That's a little bit too cold.
Yeah.
That's a little too cold.
It is.
Awesome. Great day to be inside. Hopefully you have heat. Yeah.
Yep.
Cool.
All good there.
We're blessed to have inside heat. So thank you so much for coming on the program. Really excited for the conversation here. I'd love to, instead of me introducing you in too much depth and saying a bunch of stuff that I don't really know, I'd love to hear your background and how you got into freight. Everybody's story of how they got into freight is a little bit different. Not a lot of people are, we're little kids saying one day I'm going to be a freight broker. But it just happens. Right. So I'm curious to kind of hear your story and the initiation of Schulz Logistics and how that came to be.
I probably got here the same way the largest group got here. I was born into it. My parents, dad drove a truck. My grandpa on my dad's side had a trucking company. I was months old when I had my first ride in a truck. Grew up around a trucking company and truck drivers. So I literally have lived it my entire life, growing up around it. Did all the jobs with my dad's trucking company from absolute bottom to absolute top. So it's a tough industry to get out of once you get stuck in it. I think a lot of people say that have been lifetime transportation industry people. So that's kind of my whole story of how I got here.
Nice. So you that might be the antithesis there, where I said most people don't grow up dreaming one day to be a freight broker, but maybe you saw trucking in your future from a very early age.
Yep, I did. It ending up on the brokerage side of things. Probably makes me a bit of a traitor to a lot of the diehard trucking side of people, which historically there's been. They have been at odds with each other. There's no doubt about that, but I feel like a lot of our value comes from mine and also all of our employees' histories, backgrounds. We all have background in the trucking industry. So I had the same point of view of brokerages. Like, it was a mess. They're a pain to deal with. There was maybe a couple that I enjoyed dealing with, but that was also what gave me confidence in starting a brokerage, is that we can be different.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, because especially if you've been on the asset side, you see some of the problems with brokers at large, I guess. And I'm always pre-qualifying everything I say with, hey, speaking in broad strokes. Yes. Every brokerage is going to be a little bit different. Everybody brings some specific value to the table. I'm curious, what would you say is the specific value that Schulz Logistics brings to the table that differs from other brokers, other transportation providers? What's your philosophy for this business?
Probably like genuine empathy and understanding. We understand all of the issues and expenses and challenges that trucking companies face, from the driver shortage that isn't getting any better, hours of service, maintenance, breakdowns, dealing with tow companies here and there, losing your hours sitting at shippers and receivers taking so long. I mean, those are material problems to us, and we understand them from experience. It's not just, oh, they're complaining about this again. We genuinely understand it's a problem, and we genuinely try to smooth over a lot of those issues to make working with us an easier process for trucking companies.
That's awesome. You said two things there that really piqued my interest. The first was this idea of driver shortage. So it's interesting because I hear folks saying this isn't a real thing. It's an invented, not a real shortage. It's actually a wage problem. But on the other side, I talked to my Uber driver. I was in I think Jacksonville, and my Uber driver owned a trucking company with 3 trucks. He went from 1 truck to 3 trucks, and that's where he said it went from being fun to being a nightmare, because to get drivers for the other 2 trucks was really hard. And it wasn't necessarily that hard to find a driver, but to find a good one that stuck was really challenging. I'm curious to what degree that sounds like your story.
Yeah, and it's the people that think that's not a problem. I always try and take the most complex things and boil it down to the simplest thing that you can actually observe and know. The easiest way to do it: go to a truck stop, spend 20 minutes, look at the average age of the driver. I guarantee you're going to see more people over 50 than, say, under 30. You know, there's more people retiring from trucking than there are 21 to 28-year-olds that say, I'm going to be a truck driver. It just, that simplifies it for me. There's no question.
Yeah, so that's a trend that will definitely continue, it looks like, in general, not just in this industry. You know, you hear about small service businesses, HVAC companies, electrical companies, where they're owned by some of the older generation, and they've got these businesses that they've grown, and they're all retiring soon. Mm-hmm. There is going to need to be somebody to fill those shoes, right? And trucking is no different.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, cool. And then the other thing that really piqued my interest was, sounds like you I love the empathy aspect of it, but it sounds like you view your carriers as customers as well.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have any trucks. I'm not going to move all of my customers' freight. You have to have good relationships with the people that do the work. And it's the same in any industry. I feel like that's a universal approach. If you're going to be a successful business, you have to take care of and listen to and make the job as easy on the people that do the actual work as you can. You're not going to do it all yourself.
Yeah, definitely. And how would you say that translates into value created for your shipper customers?
It makes us a very good intermediary between our customers that need things done or have problems that need fixed and the carriers. You know, there's times carriers are unreasonable, and there have also been times that customers have been unreasonable. And we have the knowledge and confidence to stand up and even tell a customer, our biggest customers even, this isn't going to work. This isn't right. We have to take care of this guy. And if they stand their ground and won't help compensate for stuff, we will pay money out of our own pocket, have hundreds and hundreds of times to make things right with carriers. So it makes us a good intermediary, and we can help solve problems. If our customers have lanes that have been a challenge, give us 2 or 3 months working with them, and we can pinpoint what the problem is with it and then try to come up with a solution.
Yeah, fantastic. I think also you've got this big advantage with that, where you'll stick up for your carriers, you'll stick up for your shippers. And that is, I think, based on all the conversations I've had with hundreds of brokers, that is the common thread for the ones that are really successful. It's the ones who are adding real value in the middle. It's not just finding a load and finding a truck and trying to maximize your margin in the middle at all costs on every single load. It's a solution provider business. It's an overall solution set, not just I will move one load at a time for you.
Yeah. Now, I'd rather make $100 over the next 2 years than make $20 today. So
Yeah,
we take a very long-term approach to how we do everything.
that's fantastic. I think also that also, speaking about the specific ways that you're adding value, we talked a little bit about using technology to augment and aid this thing. I know you guys are very technology forward brokerage without losing your minds
Yeah.
at the same time and without losing your identity either. You guys are Parade customers, recently went live with Parade. I believe you guys are using McLeod. You probably have a few other things. I think you're using green screens on rating. So I think that, using that tech stack intelligently is great, but you can't just add technology and stir. So I'm curious to hear your take on how do you implement technology, make sure that you're not falling behind on the tech, and make sure that you're maximizing your efficiency and effectiveness without losing your identity.
I had to smile earlier when you said tech forward facing company, because I personally and theoretically, I am a very anti AI person. I see a ton of value in human interaction. That's what set us apart. But I'm also logical enough to look at the world and say, we're going to fall behind if we don't keep up on this stuff. So without being real crazy about it to start with, it really has helped us take a balanced approach to AI and technology. I'm not the guy who's just after the new shiny toy and something new and exciting. We had a very direct approach to how we wanted to do this. We looked at the major areas of our brokerage. We have scheduling, which is a huge one that takes up a ton of time. Covering all the loads, finding carriers for all these loads, that's another piece. And so the green screens, the rating part isn't so much about time savings as it is creating better and more usable data. So that's kind of in a little different world. But we basically looked for companies that were going to simplify and streamline those processes. So it has taken a bit of the human interaction and some of our personality out of acquiring capacity, booking carriers on loads. But we kind of make up for that because we still handle like all the problems. Anytime carriers need to interact or have a specific question after they're already working with us, we still get to make our impressions and work with them. So we still have our personal touch in that area and focused on some of the less personal portions to streamline and give us some time back.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that, you have to be strategic about where you're automating stuff, because you get, I can only speak for Parade's technology and like the approach that we're taking to this, because I work here. So we have basically, the way that we're looking at this is, we found from our conversations with our customers that initial, hey, is that load still available? Here's my rate. No, sorry, your MC number, we can't work with you for whatever reason. That conversation happening over and over again all day, that's not really where the relationship gets built.
No.
But spending all your time there does kind of preclude you from having those later relationship type conversations.
Yep, it does. 100%. You're filtering out some of the basically just no value conversations, like interacting with a carrier that has a conditional safety rating. That's going to take time, and we can't use them. Like it's an insurance. There's no breaking that rule. So it eliminates a lot of that. Yeah, it gives that time back.
We also find that across our platform, about 75% of the interactions and quotes that come in with our AI tool called CoDriver are actually disqualified for the broker. So that means that if you spend 25% of the time now on the quotes that are from carriers that you can actually work with, in an ideal world, you can go have that conversation with the carrier and say, well, what lanes do you like to run? Do you run this lane a lot? What are your preferences for types of freight? Where I want to take this quote, and if you run the lane well for me, I want to turn this into a relationship if it's a fit.
Yeah.
And that also helps with your carrier facing sales philosophy of, this carrier is my customer and I don't want to just do one transaction.
No.
If they're a good carrier, I want to win their capacity more often.
No.
So I think that that's kind of one area where there's that trade-off of like, yes, I'm automating some of those initial top of the carrier funnel conversations, but ideally getting carriers deeper into that carrier funnel of 1 load and then 4 loads and then 50 loads. And then every single load that carrier runs is with me.
Yeah.
Got to have something for every step of the way there, basically.
Yep. And long-term carriers, like almost having our own contract carriers, is the centerpiece of our long-term strategy. It's the last few years since the first quarter of 2022, it's been pretty easy to survive as a brokerage. You can be pretty aggressive with your rates. You'd find trucks, plenty of capacity, no challenges there. We could have used that time to maximize our profits and made a ton more money, but we built up our durability. We found the carriers with similar philosophies that have been around a while, that understand it's the long-term relationships and contract freight that you're going to get at a consistent rate year round is what keeps you in this. So when we see the spikes in rates, 60-70% of our freight is already covered. It's not exposed to that. So we're trying to get as high as we can with that, because that's what builds your durability. Your margins are going to be smaller, but you're not going to be taken out of business by a bad price spike like we saw in 2020 all the way through 22.
Yeah, absolutely. Got to get your smart lane set up. So we also have, we talked a little bit about your background as well in economics. So, and my background is also econ as well. And something that's very interesting about this market is that it's very volatile. Talk a little bit about the interplay between having more relationship versus transactional carrier relationships and how that impacts the volatility of your own business.
Yep. Now we'll have to be careful. You get two econ guys started talking about econ and it can get away from us and lose track of time. But so yeah, it is a very volatile industry. And that's why we try to move away from transactional as much as we can. There is some of that that's going to be absolutely necessary. When you start a new lane, new shipper, receiver, new area of the country, whatever it may be, you're not going to have carriers in place for those lanes. Especially it gets harder to find them as capacity gets tighter, because most of those carriers that are open to those sort of agreements and have that philosophy already have their capacity committed elsewhere. So you really have to use that time to find those like-minded carriers, and supply and demand changes every day. And you've got multiple levels of it. You've got the overall economy. Is there more freight being generated? The global economy, is there more imports and exports coming in and out? That creates freight. You look at weather, that can have an impact. If they're getting a snowstorm or 18 below, you're gonna have trucks freezing up. That's less capacity. Even if roads are open and trucks are going half speed, that reduces capacity in those areas by 50%. It all has an impact, and trying to make sense of that can be difficult. And that's kind of why I like economics. It's like, you're not after an answer. It's not math, right? You're not saying, well, this is our equation and this is our answer. Economics is more about understanding the forces at play and trying to get yourself in a range of what you're expecting to see.
Yeah, definitely. And I, when you're in those econ, when you take your econ classes and all that, when they talk about the models, supply and demand, as an example, they teach those models and they say, this is a model, ceteris paribus, all else equal.
Yeah.
So, and all else is not equal in real life.
No.
So there are a million things impacting the rates to go up and down, supply and demand to go up and down. And it's impossible to predict what that market is going to do soon. And if you could, I think that when we talk about rates specifically as well, it's like, if we could automate contract rates really in the long term accurately and say, here's where I think the market is going to go in 6 months to a year from now, the person who's building that algorithm is not in trucking. They're making billions and billions of dollars in the rest of the economy in the stock market.
Yep.
You can't predict that stuff. So it's really just like kind of that short term, and then a healthy amount of just gambling, basically.
Yeah, it is. I have said multiple times that I love logistics because it's having a brokerage. It's almost like legalized gambling. This is what I think it's going to do. Am I closer to the median or where it's going to get the freight awarded than everybody else? And it absolutely is. You just try and inform yourself as much as you can. Look at history. The longer you've been in this and the more ups and downs you've seen, you can start to get a little bit of a feel for it. And then like the green screens, the rating, we're getting our own model built right now. And it has been building since last year. Every load that gets covered adds data to this. So while you don't want to live and die by that, you still want some human eyes on it and human experience looking at it. It is valuable information to look forward, because when you start to smooth things out, you'll see years that are crazy, whether they're higher or lower. But if you smooth it out, you can start looking at a 5-year average, and that starts to give you a pretty good picture of what to expect. You may miss, but you're going to be around the average if you keep an eye on what trajectory that's moving at.
Yeah, and we've got a rating intelligence offering as well. It's much less the focus these days as it was a year or two ago. But whenever we were talking to brokers about that, and I'd ask them, how are you doing rates right now? It was a lot of, it's a lot of this mental calculator, right? It's this like, I'm doing it based on vibes. And that can actually work surprisingly really well for somebody who's been in it and just has a really good innate feel. Hard to scale that. Same with capacity. It's like you've got a guy who knows a guy, and you've got your relationships that you've built over a couple of years. And I don't run this lane, but Jim across the cubicle, he runs this lane. So I can just talk to Jim and see like, oh, do you have a guy for this lane? I'm really trying to cover this thing.
Yeah.
Hard to scale, right?
It is. Yeah. When you take knowledge and experience, it is tough. I mean, education teaches you. My view on that is education kind of teaches you or gives you the box to put your experiences in. You can have a better understanding of what you're experiencing. But without going through it and being there a number of times, education is not terribly helpful. But over time, the more experience you build, you kind of know what to expect. I've seen something like this before. You know what areas to look at for what's causing the changes. And yeah, it's hard to teach experience.
Definitely. I think there's also great training out there that you can do. There's a lot of areas that you can invest in, and that's part of the challenge of running any business, right? It's just like figuring out, like, I've got a certain number of dollars to invest in training, technology, XYZ, nicer office. I can get better coffee for the office, and everybody's going to be even a little bit happier. Like, there's an ROI for everything, and it's a balance to try to find that optimal mix.
Yep. Yeah. You got to be very direct on what you're going to put your money and focus into and try and get the most return you can. Because there's hundreds of things you could focus on, but you need to find the best, the ones that fit your strengths, and go with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of circling back to that idea though about AI, strategic AI utilization, and not losing your identity. What do you think, where do you see the major pitfalls for brokerage who's not thinking about this strategically and is just like adding technology and stir?
You need to have an identity. And one of the factors that goes into your decision with new technology is how it's going to impact your identity. Something that's a real threat to your identity, probably that's a pretty strong negative in it not getting into your repertoire, I guess. So, and you don't want to go crazy because it's these technologies and programs are not plug and play. I've never in my life done an integration that has just up and worked. There is always going to be hurdles. There are going to be things that damage your reputation. There are going to be miscommunications. There are going to be things that don't work right and send you scrambling for 2-3 days at a time. So you really have to look at long term when we get this ironed out. try and imagine what it's going to look like, because that's not how it's going to look day one. And you have to really commit to working the kinks out and getting it to what you want it to be and how you want it to fit into your identity.
Definitely. I think another good example of this, not even a technology thing, is a lot of brokers, as they're looking to scale, are moving from a cradle to grave model to a split Chicago style model of the brokerage. And I think a lot of the time that makes a ton of sense. I think it's probably more scalable, but again, like everybody's a little bit different. But that move, there are going to be things that break in the process and things that slip through the cracks inevitably. It's like you have to plan for that stuff, get ahead of it, but you have to expect that, oh, okay, we're going to completely change the way that we're doing business. It's all going to work perfectly from day one. It's just not the case.
No.
Yeah.
Kind of a funny story about me that 100% true, might make me look a little amateur, but I just heard Cradle to the Grave last fall. Never heard it before. Never heard of Chicago style. No idea. I never knew what a brokerage model was. I found out about them late last year. We took the approach that we wanted to be different. We didn't look up. We knew what work needed to be done. Robbie and I started from day one and attracted customers and then covered loads. And as we grew, we looked at the areas that we had more work that needed to be done, and we hired people for those roles. So we really grew into what we are now based on where we were lacking at different points along our path to get here. So we're kind of our own model. We don't have, like I said, I just found out about them last year.
Yeah, you'd actually be surprised, because there's a lot of market lingo, and I made a LinkedIn post. I think this was like 2 years ago, probably, just saying, hey, this is what cradle to grave is, and this is what a split model is, and here's some of the pros and cons. And you wouldn't believe how many comments from reputable brokers who had been in the industry, and they're like, I've never heard these terms for this thing before either. So it's like, like you said, you arrived at your current model through trial and error, and basically just figuring out kind of what works. And it probably turned into something that looks a little bit like one or the other. Another one is like this pod model, where they have like little groups that own a set of customers and they work as their own little business unit. I know that their brokerage is doing that and scaling. So it's like, there's no perfect right way to do it. I think it's all about what's right for your business.
That kind of goes back to your identity. You know, what do you want to look like? How do you want to operate as a company? How do you want like every company's going to have workflow. You need to have an idea of how is that work going to flow for us, from getting new business to bringing the loads into your system, to covering them, to closing them out with the billing and AP. I mean, yeah, you just have to figure out what works best for you in each of those areas, and that's what you'll become.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Joe, we're here at time. I really appreciate you taking the time to have the conversation. How can the audience get in touch with you? I don't know how many shippers are watching this program, but I would imagine a few. So I'm kind of curious, like, hey, how can people get in touch with Schulz Logistics, and how can they learn more about you?
Our website is schultzlogistics.com. SCHULZ is Schulz. We have kind of a unique spelling. Also on LinkedIn, all of our contact information, email addresses, phone numbers, they can find all that stuff there. And question, just reach out. If you just have I love talking about this stuff. So anybody that's got just a general question, feel free to ask. I'll talk. I'll do consultations all day long. Love it.
Sweet. I love that, Joe. Are you going to be at TIA in April?
I think Robbie is going to that one. I will be at the Food Shippers of America.
Oh, nice.
Backup. Robbie, I tried registering, didn't get in time. So Robbie's in, and I'll be there for lunches and dinners if he can get anybody to talk to him long enough.
Well, Food Shippers will be sweet, I hear. I've never been to that one, but I hear it's a lot of fun.
Yep.
It can get a little wild, so that should be cool. Awesome, Joe. Well, I appreciate your time here, and definitely let's talk again soon. Everybody go connect with Joe. He's got a wealth of knowledge to share. Talk to you soon.
Thank you for the invite. Appreciate it. Have a good day.
Totally.